The overarching clinical and conceptual stake for Lacan in the early to mid 1970s, let me remind you, is the true and the real. They are not the same, but nor are they completely unrelated. Let's start by recalling their distinction. The true, according to Lacan, is contingent, just like narcissistic love, interestingly enough. But the real is impossible, just like the sexual relationship. As Lacan's been saying since Seminar 20, however, the path of narcissistic love is also that of unconscious knowledge, especially when unconscious knowledge comes to occupy the position of truth, as we see in the analytic discourse. Why? Why exactly is the path of narcissistic love also that of unconscious knowledge? Because in order for narcissistic lovers to convince themselves and others that the sexual relationship, qua oneness, is not just possible but also necessary, they have to repress every bit of evidence to the contrary, rendering all signs and signals of the sexual rapport's impossibility unconscious. The logic here, as you know, is fairly simple. In order for the illusion of oneness to hold, the impossibility of oneness must be obscured. No unconscious in which to veil the impossibility of oneness with self and other alike, and no contingent pronouncement of narcissistic love, again and again, to the point of apparent necessity, even. Which is how we've arrived at the basic line of inquiry that Lacan's been scaling up since Seminar 20. Here it is, one more time. Narcissistic love offers us a point of access to unconscious truth, and unconscious truth offers us a point of access to the impossible real. Love, let me be clear, leads us to truth, and truth leads us to the real. And nowhere does all of this happen more profoundly, Lacan wagers, than in the clinic. Hence, once more, his matheme for the analytic discourse. From symptomatic stupidities back to speaking bodies commanded by unconscious truths, truths which carry with them bits and pieces of the real, he's been arguing here in Seminar 21. And note that move. Those symptomatic stupidities, there's S1 in the matheme for the analytic discourse. Those speaking bodies in which they originate, there's that slashed S in the upper right-hand corner. Speaking bodies commanded by unconscious truths, there's that S2 in the bottom left corner of this matheme. And what Lacan has here invited us to consider, notice, I'm not saying that this is indeed the case. He's inviting us to consider the possibility that there might indeed be some bits and pieces of the real, like sediment flowing through the unconscious as it passes through these grooves that you see when you draw the analytic discourse as a matheme. All of those vectors are now figured as grooves, pathways along which true saying, full of unconscious truth, and within that truth sediments of the real now pass. But we might just as well take this from the opposite angle and do so with a bit more conceptual flair. From the opposite angle, starting with the real instead of those stupid symptomatic statements, we might say this. In order to develop a science of the real, as Lacan is now calling it, we must first come to terms with logics of unconscious truth. And in order to arrive at such terms, we must start with their obfuscations, their concealments, their hieroglyphemes, and all manner of stupidities, not least of which are the hieroglyphemes that we call Hallmark cards, the ones we keep sending to each other ad nauseum. Which is why Lacan, I think, keeps talking about the Greeks in the second half of Seminar 21, and why mentions of his old friend Heidegger often follow. Like it or not, Lacan is inviting us to read the analytic discourse as a hermeneutic phenomenology, akin to Heidegger's return to the Greek notion of aletheia. But with a crucial twist, mind you, because what's ultimately at stake for Lacan is not the true, but the real. And not just as raw and wriggling materiality, but also, more importantly, the real as an impasse of formalization. Put a bit more archly, we might say this. In the vino of veritas, Lacan wants to find sediments of the real. And in the analytic discourse, he sees a way to decant the two, allowing analyst and analysand alike to locate the real in the true, and thus to hold a place for it in analytic experience, but just until something better comes along. Hence, the wild notion he comes up with in Chapter 7, real knowledge. And as you can tell, I'm not entirely sold on this clustering of knowledge and the real, but he might be onto something. I'm willing to hear him out. Here's how he figures this. Where unconscious knowledge occupies a position of truth, exactly as you see it written out in the analytic discourse, that S2 in the position of truth, there, Lacan wagers, we can find bits of the real at play as well. And where exactly do these bits of the real in unconscious knowledge come to us? Not in the part of unconscious knowledge that can be said and known in analytic experience. Note this move that I'm making here. Where indeed do we see these bits of the real, according to Lacan, as they flow through unconscious knowledge? Well, first, you have to remember that unconscious knowledge has these two parts. There are two unconscious knowledges. We do not see the real in the part of unconscious knowledge that can be said and known in analytic experience. It is not a matter of potentiality. It is not about knowability, sayability. But check this out. We do not see bits and pieces of the real in the unconscious's other half. We do not see it in the part of unconscious knowledge that cannot be said and known in analytic experience. We do not see it in the impotential side of unconscious knowledge. This is crucial, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. The sediment of the real that Lacan assigns to unconscious knowledge does not occupy either of the unconscious's two parts. It is not on the side of knowability, and it is not on the side of unknowability. You see? Instead, bits of the real, he claims, await discovery in and as the irremediable division between these two parts of unconscious knowledge. A division whose mediation, let me be clear, is not potential or impotential, but instead impossible. In Chapter 10 of Seminar 21, Lacan tells us that the truth of the unconscious is the revelation, indeed once more the aletheia, of the unconscious as knowledge. And the truth of this knowledge, as we've learned, is that some, but not all, of it can be known. You see, unconscious knowledge is a vast and mostly impregnable field of unknown knowledge, some of which can become known by way of symptomatic stupidities, but most of which resists all such expressions, remaining utterly unknowable. Make no mistake, the symptom may be governed by logics of contingency, but the underlying fundamental logic which conditions it is not contingency but potentiality, which always brings with it a logic of impotentiality. Here now we see the symptom in relation to the unconscious. You see, when it comes to unconscious knowledge, again, let me just try and be as clear as possible with this. We're simply powerless to know it all because we're powerless to say it all. Like truth itself, and don't get me started on feminine enjoyment, which also has the structure of a some but not all, there's simply no such thing as a wholly knowable unconscious. But nor, hear me now, is there such a thing as a wholly unknowable unconscious. And this is where things get interesting, I think, clinically and conceptually. The unconscious is always at root a both and. It's both knowable and unknowable, and never one without also being the other. Between the knowable and the unknowable dimensions of unconscious knowledge, in other words, there can be no mediation, no synthesis, no union, no oneification. Indeed, their universalization, their turning into one, is impossible. An impossibility well documented, I think, quite literally written in the slash between both and its attendant and. Seriously, look carefully at that motherfucker. Write it out and take a look. Write both and as you would write it in your notes. And take a look at this thing. There are not two signifiers there, but instead three written symbols. A both, an and a single stroke of the pen between them. And you know where I'm going with this, like I said. The same place we've been going with this for a while now. The both and written in your notes is just another 1 + 1 = 3. So what, then, is this damned real knowledge that Lacan has queued up for us in the second half of Seminar 21? It is a gap. It is a hole. It is an opening in unconscious knowledge that we can formulate. It's an irremediable division between knowable and unknowable unconscious truths that we can write, even as simply as the slash in that both and. A slash, mind you, that only appears on the page. You see, that's the thing about the real. Unlike the true, that motherfucker doesn't make a sound. Save that of pen on paper. Save that of chalk on board. It's science, amounts to that of the scribble. But I wouldn't go much further with this both and written in your notes. And you might even want to walk it back just a little bit, in fact. Let me ask the question again. Can the real, as such, be written in a slash or any other stroke of the pen? Technically speaking, no, it cannot. Its edges can be written, toed even, but the real itself cannot. It's the edge of the real, not the real itself, that written formulations like both and, 1 + 1 = 3, and some but not all bring into focus. Hence, again and again, the centrality of the matheme of the analytic discourse in Lacan's thought here in the early to mid-1970s. Why? It allows us to formulate the real as a whole in knowledge between two written symbols, a whole whose location can only be determined by looking where it ain't, at meaningless written symbols that mark its edge. Between S2 and S1 in the analytic discourse, in the recess, they establish, with the help of two crossing vectors, what do you see? What do you see in the matheme of the analytic discourse between the S2 and the S1 in the recess they help to establish with those two crossing vectors? What you see is a bit of the real. A bit of the real I have all too often traced for you with a little triangular shape, that delta we've had with us since seminar 17. I've said it before, but let me say it here again. To truly write the analytic discourse in such a way that holds a place for the real is to leave the gap between S2 and S1 empty, without any inscription whatsoever. And that's another thing about the real. Don't let any written formulation fool you. It never actually shows up. It can be neither seen nor heard, because it can be neither written nor said. This, I think, is ultimately what it means to say that the real is impossible. But I came here today to be categorical with you, so let's start now. Real knowledge is impossible knowledge, only the edge of which can be traced, much as a bit of sediment can be traced, a bit of sediment in unconscious knowledge, traced as a sum but not all, as it flows in the groove of true saying, allowing, indeed compelling, speaking bodies like yours and mine to drip with nonsense in and beyond the clinic. From S2 to /S to S1, just follow the sediment. And this, above all, I'd wager, is what we love about knowledge. You see, you might think that the greatest discovery of psychoanalysis was that of the unconscious. And you may have heard as much from Lacan, these lectures on Lacan as well. In Seminar 21, though, Lacan suggests otherwise. What psychoanalysis discovered, he says, was the truth of our love for knowledge. And for two types of unconscious knowledge in particular, one knowable and the other unknowable. I think this is what he meant the previous year in Seminar 20 when he said, all love is based on a certain relationship between two unconscious knowledges. But I don't think that's all he meant in so saying. Read that passage again. It's on page 144 of the Standard English Translation. It's not just about two unconscious knowledges, not even primarily. It's the certain relationship between them that Lacan is talking about here. All love is based on a certain relationship between two unconscious knowledges. And we now have a name for this relationship. A relationship whose operational logic is nothing if not differential. We call it irremediable division. This is how Lacan defines that certain relationship between knowable and unknowable unconscious knowledge. And again, don't lose sight of this. For me, this is one of the key points in all of this. He's doing all of this in Seminar 21, defining this relationship as one of irremediable division in a discussion, once more, of love. Recall with me page 119 of Seminar 21, the packet we've been working with. Again, you don't need to have it. I'll read it for you. But note the context in which he's doing this work of defining that relationship as one of irremediable division. It is a discussion of love. Good love, I will say then, since you will excuse me that this plagues me. Love is the truth, but only insofar as it is starting from it, starting from a cut, that there begins a different knowledge than propositional knowledge, namely unconscious knowledge. It is the truth insofar as it cannot be said about the subject, insofar as what is supposed to be able to be known about the sexual partner. Love is two half-sayings that do not overlap. And this is what gives it its fatal character. It is the irremediable division. I mean, why it cannot be remedied, which implies that the media may already be possible. And precisely, it is not only irremediable, but without any mediation. It is the connectiveness between two knowledges insofar as they are irremediably distinct. When that happens, it creates something quite privileged. So the question you have to ask yourself at this point, or at least the question I can't help but ask myself at this point, is, what type of knowledge are you in love with? Do you love the type of knowledge that can be known about yourself, about your partner, about your life together? If so, I got news for y'all. That's not love you're experiencing, but hate instead. And this, my friends, is exactly what narcissistic love, as an outgrowth of phallic enjoyment, amounts to. Not love, but hate. Hence, once more, the final words, quite literally the final words in Seminar 20, which we have studied together before. To know what your partner will do is not a proof of love. On the contrary, it is a testament to one of the worst types of hate we know. But maybe that's not you. Maybe it's the unknowable parts of unconscious knowledge that you love. Maybe you love what cannot be known about yourself, your partner, your life together. If so, I wouldn't call that love either, but instead a certain type of ignorance. And arguably not the best type of ignorance. Don't forget, there are terrifically profound ways to love ignorance, and all the more so when it's a learned ignorance that we love. So let me be clear about this, maybe even at the risk of putting too sharp a point on this thing. Fetishization of the unknowable is no better than narcissistic love. Well, I mean, maybe it's a little better, I guess, but it ain't much better. But learned ignorance in matters of love, that docta ignorantia that Lacan talks about in Seminar 19A, the psychoanalyst knowledge. Now that, if you ask me, is a step in the right direction. Far better to learn ignorance than to love it. That's what I'm telling you here. But you know what? The more I think about it, the more I think that we could even do better than learned ignorance here. I think we could do better than learned ignorance by cleaving a little closer to what Lacan in the passage from Seminar 21 I just read calls good love. That good love that he tells us is quite privileged. What type of knowledge do we love when we allow ourselves, others, and our lives together to be two half-sayings that do not overlap? What type of knowledge do we love when it's irremediable division that we cherish? I'll tell you, it is not knowable knowledge, nor is it unknowable knowledge. Instead, and this is the greatest part about it, I would call it real knowledge. Psychoanalysis discovered the truth of our love for known and knowable knowledge. And I'm telling you, the truth of our love for known and knowable knowledge is fundamentally hate. But it also discovered the truth of our love for unknown and unknowable knowledge, which I don't think amounts to hate, but instead ignorance. And yet, when we look a little closer at psychoanalytic theory, especially as Lacan gets a hold of it, we see that it also discovered something in between hate and ignorance. Something in between which is in fact no such thing, not known and unknowable knowledge, but instead real knowledge. Between known and knowable knowledge and unknown and unknowable knowledge, that is where we locate real knowledge as the irremediable division between these two. So let's see if we can put a cap on this thing, because damn if I'm not eager to move on from this real knowledge stuff, which has thrown us for quite the loop. To love real knowledge is to love the part of unconscious knowledge, it seems to me, that appears to take no part in it at all, but in fact, on closer examination, turns out to structure it completely. Not potentiality and not impotentiality, but their condition of possibility, which, incidentally, is nothing of the sort, but instead powerlessness raised to the level of impossibility. The same, I would argue, that brings us to the edge of the real. But why are we talking about all this still? Wasn't real knowledge from like one of the previous lessons in Seminar 21? Why are we still on this shit talking about real knowledge? And ostensibly in lectures dedicated to chapters 10 through 12 of Seminar 21. And they don't say a damn thing about real knowledge. So why are we still talking about it? Here's why. Because it's from the vantage point of real knowledge, the discovery of bits and pieces of the real, or at least its edges in unconscious knowledge. It's from the vantage point of this discovery that Lacan now wants to ask if the opposite is also true. And this, on my reading, is precisely what's up in chapters 10 through 12 of Seminar 21. Here's how it goes. If indeed there's a bit of the real in unconscious knowledge, could there also be some knowledge in the real? And if so, can we qualify this knowledge as unconscious? Lacan's pretty clear about the move he's making in posing this opposite question. I am making a break here, he tells us in chapter 12. I am taking things from the other end. Is there knowledge in the real? Notice also how he then works up once more to the question of unconscious knowledge. It's on page 218 of the packet. And have you seen the packet that I'm using now? Have I showed you this yet? Look at this glorious thing. Somebody, I'm sure I've shown you this before, but somebody took the packet, bound it, and sent me a glorious copy of the thing with a cover and everything. Hot damn. Gotta love this. Still, the pagination remains. 218 in your packet is still 218 in mine. Check it out. I am taking up the thread from another end, and I am putting the question about knowledge in the real. It is quite clear that this question, like all the others, is only asked from the answer. I would even say more, from the answer such as I have already emphasized it. The unconscious, in Freud's sense, is that in whose name I ask the question about knowledge in the real. But I do not ask it in giving to Freud's unconscious all its import. I am simply saying that the unconscious is at first only conceived of from the following, that it is knowledge. But I am limiting myself to that. It is in the name of this that the question about knowledge in the real takes on its meaning. So it's in the name of unconscious knowledge, where we discover bits of the real, that we inquire about the opposite. Are there also bits of knowledge, unconscious or otherwise, to be found in the real? Yes, Lacan answers, there is some. And yet, check this out, there is no need of Freud's unconscious for it to be so, he adds. The real simply doesn't give a damn about the unconscious or any other dimension of knowledge. Whether we're talking about enunciated knowledge in the field of language or unconscious knowledge in the wider realm of Lalong, the real just doesn't give a damn. In fact, Lacan even defines it as such. If you've been craving a definition of the real from this period in Lacan's thought, you can drop the bit about raw and wriggling materiality. You can also drop the bit about formalizations of impasse. The definition, the great definition, is right here in these chapters of Seminar 21. Lacan defines the real as follows. The real, he says, is that which doesn't care. Doesn't care about what, though? I can't help but wonder. And Lacan answers, about meaning. The real doesn't care about meaning. And by meaning, Lacan means that which is known. Flip the page in our beloved packet, and you'll see what I mean. Page 219, 220. What I am in the process of saying by that, in any case putting forward to you about the real, is first of all that it is that the knowledge at stake in the question, is there knowledge in the real, is to be completely separated from the use of known in the known meaning. It is from meaning, starting there, that I detach the real. But it is not from the same knowledge that I question to know whether there is knowledge in the real. The knowledge at stake in the question is not the order of knowledge which conveys meaning, or more exactly, which is conveyed by meaning. Now that's a little wild and wonky, but I think what we need is there. So let's see if we can sharpen up our boy's point here. If indeed there is knowledge in the real, it is not of the same order as that of the word knowledge as it appears in Lacan's question, is there knowledge in the real? This, according to Lacan, and he doesn't say this exactly, but this is pretty much what he's saying, y'all. This, he says, is why Aristotle's notion of intelligence, the artisan's intelligence, fails to answer the question, is there knowledge in the real, even though it asks it. And he says the same about Newton's subsequent law of universal gravitation. It fails to answer the question, is there knowledge in the real, even though it asks it. And he doesn't stop there, my friends. Einstein's theories of special and general relativity follow suit. Why? Because each mistakes an edge of the real for the real itself. To be sure, each of their written formulas, Aristotle's, Newton's, Einstein's, in their mutual function as what Lacan here calls an interplay of letters, to be sure, these formulas helped to clear the way for the science of the real, putting us on the path to its various thresholds. There's no doubt about that. However, none of these formulas is equivalent to the whole in knowledge that the real, in fact, is. Aristotle, Newton, Einstein, each gave the world a fiat lux, Lacan quips at the end of chapter 12. And God said, Aristotle said, Newton said, Einstein said, let there be light. And there was light. With light came clarity, insight, and you guessed it, knowledge. Fiat lux, let there be light. But not the knowledge Lacan imputes to the real. Instead, the knowledge enunciated in his question, is there knowledge in the real? That's the type of knowledge that we bring light to with these formulas, the type of knowledge enunciated in the question, not the type of knowledge we're wondering whether it exists in the real. This talk of Aristotle, Newton, and Einstein then, of course, brings Lacan to himself. Oh, wait, sorry, I don't mean himself. He just refers to the next individual in his intellectual history as the psychoanalyst. After Einstein comes the psychoanalyst. You gotta love this guy. You gotta love how this guy approaches things. Indeed, with this talk of the difference between the knowledge Lacan is wondering about in the real and the question that allows him to ask after it, those are two different types of knowledge, he speculates. He thinks that where Aristotle, Newton, and Einstein lapsed into fiat luxing about, letting there be light, etc., he thinks the psychoanalyst doesn't stumble in that direction. Check this out. The psychoanalyst, the one who incidentally Lacan appears to have been saving to the very end of things, because that's exactly where it finds itself in chapter 12, at the very end of things. That's what we're up to here. If Aristotle, Newton, and Einstein were all Fiat luxers, presuming to illuminate the real, Lacan says the analyst is more like the will-o'-the-wisp. You gotta love this shit. This is one of my favorite parts in Seminar 21 yet. Got me thinking. It's at the end of chapter 12 on page 224 of our packet. It's just wild, man. Check this out. The only advantage that I find in this will-o'-the-wisp, Lacan says, is that this does not amount to fiat lux. The will-o'-the-wisp does not illuminate anything. It emerges, even ordinarily, from some pestilence. This is its strength. Will-o'-the-wisp. So Aristotle, Newton, Einstein, and the like, they're all fiat luxers, trying to let there be light on the real. But not Lacan and not psychoanalysts who follow in his footsteps. On the contrary, these are will-o'-the-wisps instead. They don't purport to illuminate a damn thing. So let's take him at his word. Let's think this through for a minute. Will-o'-the-wisp. You heard that one before? Run a search on this. See what you come up with. Here's what I think you'll find. Swamps, marshes, bogs. This is where we encounter will-o'-the-wisps, ever receding from all who approach them, and always at night, mind you, luring travelers off of safe paths into dangers of every sort, leaving them lost, bewildered, and listen carefully here, astray. You see, we can't help but err when the will-o'-the-wisp appears. We are all among its dupes. And don't think that when Lacan cues up the will-o'-the-wisp, he's thinking of bioluminescence or gas combustion or any other scientific explanation for this ghostly, magical, downright supernatural phenomenon. The analyst is not a methane burst from decaying organic matter, but instead a trickster spirit back from the motherfucking dead. A trickster spirit back from the motherfucking dead in the form of a spirited, sly snake, a wily adder, blithe and glad, addressing all they meet just as the serpent addressed Eve. Empress, the way is ready, and not long. Beyond a row of myrtles on a flat fast by a fountain, one small thicket past of blowing myrrh and balm. If thou accept my conduct, I can bring thee thither soon. Lead, then, said Eve. He leading swiftly rowelled, entangles, and made intricate seem straight, to mischief swift. Hope elevates, and joy brightens his crest, as when a wandering fire, compact of unctuous vapor, which the night condenses, and the cold environs round, kindled through agitation to a flame, which oft, they say, some evil spirit attends, hovering and blazing with delusive light, misleads the amazed night wanderer from his way to bogs and mires, and oft through pond or pool, there swallowed up and lost from succor far, so glistened the dire snake, and into fraud led Eve, our credulous mother, to the tree of prohibition, root of all our woe. Now that's some weird ass shit to say, isn't it? Where on earth did that come from? Well, it's from Paradise Lost, Book 9. Check it out. It's good business. What, though, does it mean for our analytic will-o'-the-wisp? What, let me be even more precise, for our analytic will-o'-the-wisp is this tree in question, this tree of prohibition, which their delusive light draws all who travel the analytic discourse and ever astray. A bifurcation, Lacan tells us in chapter 12, a bifurcation well captured, he says, with the letter Y. A bifurcation figured in the letter Y of something tangible with which we interact. I call your attention to pages 212, 213 of our packet, just so you know that I'm no longer reading from Paradise Lost. I do not see why I would not wade in there into something which all the same is recommended to our attention, because it stems from writing, the old urzine, the primal scene, as it is inscribed in the Bible, at the beginning of the aforesaid Genesis. The tempter, and then the fathead. And that not so. Is that not so, the one called Eve? And then the asshole of assholes. Is that not so, the first Adam? And then what circulates there? The thing that gets stuck in his throat, the apple, as it's called. And worse, that's not all, There's the granddad who turns up and then lets fly at them. For my part, when I read that, I am not against it. I am not against it since it is full of meaning. This indeed is precisely what it must be cleansed of. Perhaps if one scratched away all the meaning, one would have a chance of reaching the real. This is even what I am in the process of teaching you, that it is not the meaning of the complaint that is important for us. It is what one might find beyond, as definable in terms of real. Only to clean away the meaning. It must not be forgotten, because otherwise it turns into a rejection. And in all of that, there is something that is forgotten. And it is precisely the tree. What is outrageous is that it is not noticed that it is what was forbidden. It was not the snake. It was not the apple. It was not the assholes, him and her. It was the tree that was not to be approached. Now, at this point, you might think you know where Lacan is going with this. Ah, yes, you think. The tree of good and evil from the book of Genesis. From Genesis, indeed, to Paradise Lost, just as McCormick read it out. A tree of prohibition, transgression of which does not yield morality. And with its sin, you're way too clever for that, right? Nah, transgression of this tree yields just what that old granddad promised. Not morality, but mortality. And not sin, but death. Read it again. But you, like me when I first read this passage, would be way too clever in so concluding. Lacan's final question in all of this is not about the knowledge gained from our contact with the tree of prohibition, namely knowledge of our own impending death, but about the whole in this knowledge regarding the tree's enjoyment. Skirt goes the Lacanian car as it rounds this corner doing 85 miles per hour. We now shift to enjoyment all of a sudden. And this is where things just get weird. It is impossible to know whether the tree enjoys, Lacan concludes, even though we are no less certain that it lives. The tree of prohibition, it is impossible to know whether it enjoys, even though we are no less certain that it lives. So you've heard Lacan muse on beavers, oysters, shrimp. Do they enjoy? Now you got to add trees to the list. And not just any tree. Does the tree of prohibition from Genesis to Milton and beyond enjoy? There may be knowledge in the real, but we don't know a damn thing about enjoyment. And yet, my friends, I'll be damned if that spirited, sly snake, that wily adder, blithe and glad, doesn't enjoy talking to Eve, all the way to the very tree which endowed him with speech, the tree of prohibition. At which point, I guess we can only imagine the dialogue that presumably follows when they arrive. And above all, the tree's response to that blithe adder and his attendant Eve. A response well stated, or at least suggested, by one more question from Lacan, again at the end of our readings for this lecture. What does the real answer if enjoyment questions it?